Hello, and we're in a different classroom today, so if you notice that the audio is different, that is why. So I'm going to be going over Pre-algebra 1.6 Reciprocals, the problem set. So this is a very short problem set. We've only got one problem with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 subproblems. So let's go ahead and start. What is the reciprocal of -1? So what we want to do to find a reciprocal of -1 is we want to remember what our reciprocal definition is. We have 1 over x times x is equal to 1. So what we can do is we can go ahead and plug in our reciprocal thing here. So we can go ahead and say -1 and -1 over here. And if we go ahead and combine these, we get -1 over -1, and the negatives will cancel out, and we just get 1 over 1, which is 1, and so that checks out. So our reciprocal is 1 over -1, or we can just write this as -1, right, because 1 over -1 is just -1. So what we actually have here, if we go ahead and rewrite this out, we have -1 times -1, which is just 1, right? And we remember that from our identity when we did 1 over 1 times 1 is equal to 1 as the reciprocal, and therefore 1 is its own reciprocal, which is fun. It's very fascinating. So for B, what number is not the reciprocal of any number? We also discussed this in class. We discussed this in the lecture. And so what we have is there's only one number that fills out this criteria, and that is 0. Because 0 is not the reciprocal of any number. If we have 7, that 7 can be the reciprocal of another number, has a reciprocal. So 7 has a reciprocal, so there is a number that is a reciprocal of 7. But for 0, there is no number that is a reciprocal of 0, because if we do our little process here and do 1 times x, 1 over x times x is equal to 1, and we go ahead and replace these with zeros, what we have is 1 over 0 times 0, and anything times 0 cannot be equal to 1. So that makes absolutely no sense, and that means that 0 cannot have a reciprocal. So the answer is 0. So what is the product of any non-zero number and twice its reciprocal? So the wording is a little bit complicated, but you will get a lot of complexly worded problems. So this is essentially saying we have a non-zero number, x, and we have twice its reciprocal, so 2 times 1 over x. And we want to know what the product of x times 2 times 1 over x is. Well, 2 times 1 over x is the same thing as 2 over x. And we can go ahead and take our x here and multiply that across. And what we get is 2x over x. And these x's are going to cancel out. And so our final answer is 2 over 1, which is equal to 2. And so that is our answer there. For problem D, multiply the negation of a positive number by the reciprocal of that same positive number. What is the product? So let's go ahead and multiply. So we're going to multiply the negation of a positive number. So we can go ahead and say, let our number be x. So we have -x by the reciprocal of that same positive number. So that will mean that our reciprocal will be 1 over x, right? And we want to know what is the product. So we go ahead and do -x times 1 over x, which is the same thing as -x over x, which is the same thing as -1. And so our answer is -1. That is the answer to the product. And we can go ahead and plug in any number here. So let's go ahead and do -2 times 1 over 2. And what we get is -2 over 2, which is the same thing as -1. And so we get that once again. So now we go on to problem E. compute 2 times 3 times 4 times 1 over 2 times 1 over 3 times 1 over 4. And we don't have to do 2 times 3 times 4, which would be the same thing as 6 times 4, which would be 24. And then you could go ahead and multiply all of these. Well, 1/2 times 1 over 3 is going to be 1 over 6. And so what we're going to get is 1 over 24. And so what happens here is this times this is just going to be 1. We should not be doing this because what we should recognize is that 1 over 2 is the reciprocal of 2, 1 over 3 is the reciprocal of 3, and 1 over 4 is the reciprocal of 4. And so if we move these around to multiply, let me erase this really quick. If we move this around to multiply this to this, this to this, and this to this, what we will get is 1 times 1 times 1, and that is just going to be equal to 1. So we know that this is 1. So now let's go ahead and do our last problem here. Compute 8 times negative 1 over 8. Well, this is extremely similar to our problem D, where we multiplied the negation of a positive number by the reciprocal of that same positive number, but instead we have the positive number and the negative reciprocal. So what we go ahead and do is we go ahead and multiply 8 times 1 over 8, which is going to be 8 over negative 8, which is going to be the same thing as negative 1. And that is all of our problems. This was nice, short, and sweet. And so we are done with this. And have a great day.